Funding for this CyberWire podcast is made possible in part by Cybersecurity, the Fifth Domain, a 2-day virtual conference in the Great Power Competition Conference Series, sponsored by the Department of Defense, the University of South Florida, and Cyber Florida. Join elite cybersecurity experts and top officials from the military and federal government on April 15th and 16th for deep dive discussions at the crossroads of cybersecurity and national security. Check out the full agenda and register at go.gpc-conference.org. go.gpc-conference.org. Iran says Israel was responsible for sabotaging the Natanz nuclear facility yesterday, and Tehran promises revenge. Online plotting results in the arrest of a Texas man alleged to have planned an attack on an Amazon Web Services center. Scraped data from LinkedIn and Clubhouse are being hawked online. Andrea Little-Limbago from Interos addresses asymmetric power within cyberspace and how that plays out in warfare. Our guest is Giovanni Vigna from VMware on the takedown of the Emotet infrastructure. And the U.S. moves to fill senior cybersecurity positions. From the CyberWire studios at Data Tribe, I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire summary for Monday, April 12, 2021. Two kinetic incidents of importance surfaced over the weekend. Both had at least one foot in cyberspace. In the first, Iran's Natanz nuclear facility sustained an apparently deliberately planned explosion and power outage Sunday, according to the New York Times. Iran had just begun on Saturday injecting gas into the new generation uranium enrichment centrifuges at Natanz. Testing marked National Nuclear Day in Iran. A member of Iran's parliament said, quote, "The blackout in Natanz on the anniversary of National Nuclear Day is suspicious and may be due to sabotage, while Iran is trying to convince the Western countries to lift the sanctions." End quote. While decrying the outage as sabotage and an act of terror, even nuclear terror, since Natanz is a nuclear facility, specifically one devoted to uranium enrichment, Iranian authorities did not immediately assign blame. Israeli media, however, unofficially attributed the incident to an Israeli cyber attack and cited anonymous Western intelligence sources as telling them that the sabotage had been a Mossad operation. Whether those sources were Israeli or from other countries is so far unknown. The Wall Street Journal reports that this morning Tehran did the same and promised revenge against the Zionists. So there's no longer any doubt about whom Iran sees as responsible for the explosion. The Washington Post quoted an unnamed senior U.S. official as saying, "We have seen reports of an incident at the Natanz enrichment facility in Iran. The United States had no involvement, and we have nothing to add to speculation about the causes." End quote. Israel, of course, didn't and isn't expected to publicly avow any role in the incident. CNN, reading between the various lines, thinks that Israeli Army Chief of Staff Aviv Kochafi alluded to the operation in a sideways fashion a few hours after Iran reported the explosion, when he said in a speech that Israel's, quote, "operations throughout the Middle East are not hidden from the eyes of the enemies," end quote. He added, "They are watching us, seeing the capabilities and carefully considering their steps," end quote. The Natanz facility, which Iran maintains, is a peaceful nuclear research facility, but which many observers think is a nuclear weapons development operation, has been subjected to cyber attack before. The Stuxnet tool, widely believed to have been developed by 2009 and subsequently introduced into Natanz in a joint Israeli-U.S. operation, disabled centrifuges at the installation by affecting the Siemens programmable logic controllers used in the enrichment process. The other incident involved the arrest Thursday of a Texas man whom the FBI says attempted to buy explosives from an undercover FBI employee, allegedly intending to blow up an Amazon Web Services facility in Virginia. Bleeping Computer says that the Bureau identified the man's plans from posts he'd made in January on the My Militia site. A third party also tipped off the FBI that the suspect, one Seth Aaron Pendley, had communicated in a signal message an interest in buying C4, the record reports. C4 is a kind of plastic explosive which uses RDX as its principal ingredient. It's a military explosive that's also been used in terrorist bombings. The Justice Department said in a Friday press release announcing the arrest and the charges that Mr. Pendley explained in a signal message that he was planning to use C4 to attack Amazon's data center, which he felt would, as he put it, kill off about 70% of the Internet. Of course, to use C4, one must get C4, and one of Mr. Pendley's online contacts, one whom Justice describes as a confidential source, put Mr. Pendley in touch with a potential supplier, who was, of course, an undercover FBI employee. According to the Justice Department, quote, in recorded conversations, Mr. Pendley allegedly told the undercover he planned to attack web servers that he believed provided services to the FBI, CIA, and other federal agencies. He said he hoped to bring down the oligarchy currently in power in the United States, end quote. When he met the undercover employee on April 8th, Mr. Pendley picked up what he believed to be explosives, but which in fact were just inert materials. He had the undercover employee show him how to arm and detonate the phony explosives, and he then loaded them into his car, at which point the FBI arrested him. Information from both LinkedIn and Clubhouse is being offered for sale in criminal markets. In both cases, the data appear to be publicly available and to have been scraped. Both LinkedIn and Clubhouse have convincingly denied being breached. The data on offer appear to be what the media's users would have themselves made public. And finally, President Biden will appoint NSA alumni to senior cybersecurity posts, the Washington Post reports. Chris Inglis will serve as National Cybersecurity Director, and Jen Easterly will serve as CISA Director. Easterly was among the NSA officials involved in establishing U.S. Cyber Command almost 10 years ago. Inglis has served for 8 years as NSA Executive Director, the second-ranking official in the agency. As the first National Cyber Director, a role created late last year by Congress in response to recommendations developed by the Cyberspace Solarium, his role will be coordination of civilian agencies' cyber defense and review of the relevant portions of their budgets. The position is outside the National Security Council, and so Inglis will not be responsible for overseeing offensive cyber policy as executed by military services and the intelligence community. And now, a word from our sponsor, ExtraHop, stopping advanced threats with network detection and response. Stopping advanced threats requires knowing exactly what you're up against. With 90 days look-back, ExtraHop Reveal X is the only solution that shows you not just where the intruders are going within your network, but where they've been. ExtraHop Reveal X provides complete visibility across cloud, data center, and IoT, even when traffic is encrypted. Powered by cloud-based AI, Reveal X finds threats in real time, while powerful investigation and forensics capabilities allow you to respond 84% faster. See how it works in the full production demo, free online at extrahop.com/cyber. That's extrahop.com/cyber. The recent international law enforcement effort to take down the Emotet botnet has by all accounts been remarkably successful. Time will tell if Emotet's operators are able to reconstitute the botnet or who might step in to fill the vacuum left in the takedown's wake. Giovanni Vigna is director of VMware's NSBU Threat Analysis Unit, and he joins us with insights on what he and his team have been tracking.
Emotet is one of the most prevalent malware, and it has been around for a substantial amount of time and has evolved in many different ways. I mean, this is common with malware. There are groups that are responsible for a piece of malware. Often they sell access through their malware, so like installation as a service. Sometimes they change their tactics. Sometimes they change their code to avoid detection, to avoid being profiling. So actually, it's a big part of any threat intelligence analyst to sort of, follow this lineage and understand how a particular threat evolves. However, this particular threat was egregious because of the size of the pool of machines that were infected and the success that it had in collecting victims and therefore data that was then monetized in many different ways, from information, personal information access to credit card fraud, from banking fraud to ransomware. The whole system had different aspects depending on the time and place.
How successful has law enforcement been in their takedown of Emotet?
I think they've been very successful. Of course, the real success in this operation is the apprehension of actual human beings. So this can really stop when people are in jail. Of course, you can also really dismantle, I would say, the infrastructure. And that's what we observe in our telemetry. So just to give you a little bit of background, as being the threat intelligence group and under my direction, we keep tabs on what we call the threat landscape. And so we constantly look at data that comes from our customers, from the open source environment, to see what are the most seen pieces of malware, what are the most common type of CNC communication. And we have, of course, Elasticsearch and a bunch of different algorithms to identify what are the most relevant threats. And we saw with the takedown Emotet for being like the most obvious prevalent threat to completely disappear. And so this is a sign based on data, since we're data scientists too, that actually the takedown was effective. However, we will only know in the months following when we will see, for example, arrests, convictions for actual operators of this type of threat.
That's Giovanni Vigna from VMware's NSBU Threat Analysis Unit. It's time to take a moment to tell you about our sponsor, Ningio. Are you tired of boring cybersecurity awareness training PowerPoints that don't keep your attention? Turn your team into cybersecurity ninjas by getting them Ningio'd. Through animation, micro-learning episodes featuring celebrity actors, Ningio empowers individuals and organizations to obtain the skills, habits, and behaviors to truly become your last line of defense against cyber threats. Written and produced by Hollywood writers and based on real-life ripped-from-the-headlines events, millions of employees have come to love Ningio. With easy-to-remember security awareness lessons and teachable moments, companies using Ningio report a drastic decrease in cyber attacks based on human error. So head on over to Ningio.com, that's Ninjio.com, to learn more and watch their latest episode for free. And we thank Ningio for sponsoring our show. And joining me once again is Andrea Little-Limbago. She's the Vice President of Research and Analysis at Interos. Andrea, it's always great to have you back. I am fascinated by the asymmetry of power within cyberspace, how things in cyber allow folks who otherwise would not have been able to have the influence on the world that they would have to have now. In the old days of, building battleships and aircraft carriers, you can have influence in cyber without having to build a battleship or an aircraft carrier, right?
No, absolutely. And it really, it's one of those aspects, I think, of cyber that gets overlooked quite a bit. We say a lot, the notion of asymmetric power, and we think, very often of, say, North Korea and Iran, even Russia, if you look at their economy size, to have really this outsized impact on global affairs. And it's really changing warfare and geopolitics enormously. I think much more so than is normally appreciated. I mean, we have this big push right now on major power competition, and that it's 100% understandable. Absolutely, there are a lot of areas of competition going on between the U.S. and China, but I worry that we lose sight on how other trends may be going on, especially through this notion of asymmetric power, and how that's also shifting geopolitics. And so that's just something that I've been looking at a little bit, especially when thinking about not just through cyber, but also cyber and emerging technologies and how they're integrated together, and how that's really changing the evolution of warfare really, really quickly. It's one of those things that a lot of people think it's more so in science fiction, 10, 20 years from now, maybe at the earliest, but it's going on now. And so it would be unfortunate to overlook it. I think also it would be myopic because it's going to be disrupting all aspects of both national security, economic security, global trends, all of those. It's reshaping a lot of different aspects of the world right now.
Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, definitely. And the one that I've been looking at a bit is just the use of drones in warfare. And again, it's one of those things, several years ago, a drone was associated with an attempted coup in Venezuela, if folks remember that. And then we kind of didn't hear about drones very much so, other than, again, in sort of these stories that were looking ahead. But what we saw over the last year, where it was signs of drones being used in numerous regional conflicts. And a couple of Armenia and Azerbaijan, the conflict going on there, there's drone footage that was identified as having a potentially decisive role in the outcome of that. And one, you can think of both through the lens of warfare, and that some were even saying it to the point that it made tanks irrelevant. And so, not sure I'd go that far quite yet, but when you do have a drone targeting tanks, that mental model really does have to shift very quickly in looking at how technology is shaped and innovation are reshaping warfare. So that's just one example. In the Tigray region in Ethiopia, there have been claims of drones there, with some footage posted on social media. In Western Sahara and Morocco, where there's a fight over territory, and that's actually a lot of these are fights over territory, which is also something that's reemerging. And I think that this asymmetric notion of power is actually helping that. There as well, there are some drones used in that regional conflict. And so that's just over the last year. And I imagine we'll see many more in the years to come. But when you look at that, so one, it's shifting the nature of warfare, but it's also shifting the nature of who's making these drones, right? And so it gives the power to those who are the ones largely making all these drones. And right now, China really has quite a lock on a lot of that market. Although in these conflicts I just mentioned, some of the producers range from UAE to Turkey or Israel. So it's there are a lot of different countries out there making them. And there actually right now are about 100 countries that have drone capabilities on the military end. So it's not something that is just a few and far between. Because it's so much, because it's cheap to have a outsized impact, it's another area. But you can imagine down the road, what happens when drones get compromised.
What about in terms of setting policy for conflict in general? I mean, I'm thinking that a nation might have much less resistance to starting a war if we don't have to send soldiers, we don't have to send pilots, we don't have to send sailors, that all that right. can be handled by these remote vehicles and even robots,
Yeah, well, I mean, there have been some studies already. I mean, there's some websites that track the U.S. usage of drones, which has increased quite a bit over the last decade. And there has been some additional studies showing that by taking the human out of the loop, it does make people, policymakers, leaders, less restricted in their use of it. And so I do think that there's a whole lot of human and ethical components that go along with it, and more policies that need to be made to regulate basically the proper use and the rules of the rules of warfare going ahead, and when it might be acceptable, as far as when is it justified as far as within the terms of warfare, and when is unjustified. And that's something that's been a challenge throughout history as technology changes and evolves. What is just and unjust warfare? And this is the latest example, and it's starting to get some attention, but there's a whole lot more work that needs to be done in that area, because it's absolutely right, when you take your own human loss out of it, it does alter the calculus, very much so.
All right. Well, Andrea Little-Limbago, thanks for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks to all of our sponsors for making the CyberWire possible. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. And for professionals and cybersecurity leaders who want to stay abreast of this rapidly evolving field, sign up for CyberWire Pro. It'll save you time and keep you informed. You asked for it, you got it. Listen for us on your Alexa smart speaker, too. Don't forget to check out the Grumpy Old Geeks podcast, where I contribute to a regular segment called Security. I join Jason and Brian on their show for a lively discussion of the latest security news every week. You can find Grumpy Old Geeks where all the fine podcasts are listed, and check out the Recorded Future podcast, which I also host. The subject there is threat intelligence, and every week we talk to interesting people about timely cybersecurity topics. That's at recordedfuture.com/podcast. The CyberWire podcast is proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our amazing CyberWire team is Elliot Peltzman, Guru Prakash, Kelsey Bond, Tim Nodar, Joe Kerrigan, Carol Terrio, Ben Yellen, Nick Valecki, Gina Johnson, Bennett Moe, Chris Russell, John Petrick, Jennifer Iben, Rick Howard, Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow.